The envelope arrived on a Thursday. Cream paper, gold letters, and inside the flap handwriting he would have recognized anywhere. His name, written by the woman who had left him. She hadn't typed it, hadn't asked anyone else to write it. She had picked up a pen and written his name herself on the invitation to her own engagement party. 5 years since the divorce. 5 years of early mornings and cold coffee, and a truck that people laughed at when he pulled into the lot. Now she wanted him in the room. Not as closure, not as proof she'd moved on. As a witness, because something was coming apart, and she needed the one person who had never lied to her to watch it happen. He read the name again, set the envelope down, picked it back up. Then he went back to work. The invitation arrived on a Thursday. Cream-colored paper. Gold lettering pressed into the surface, not printed on top of it. The kind of envelope that communicated, before you even opened it, that whoever sent it had money and wanted you to know that before you read a single word. Jordan had set it on the workbench without comment, which meant she had something to say, and was deciding whether to say it. Delvon Hayes picked it up, read it once, set it down, went back to the carburetor he'd been cleaning for the past 20 minutes. Jordan waited. He read it again. Simone Carter and Damon Whitfield request the pleasure of your company. Saturday evening. An estate on Memorial Drive. Dinner. Dancing. Celebrating the next chapter. He put the envelope down a second time, picked it back up. Not because of what was printed inside. Because of what was written. By hand. On the inside flap of the envelope, in ink slightly darker than the gold lettering, in handwriting he would have recognized in the dark. His name. Delvon Jerome Hayes. Not typed, not stamped by a machine. Written. By Simone's hand. The same hand that had filled grocery lists and graded student papers late into the night and written him one note, just one, in 12 years of marriage that said, simply, I picked up your dry cleaning and I love you, and don't be late tonight. He'd kept that note. He didn't know where it was now, but he'd kept it longer than he should have. She wrote it herself, Jordan said. I see that. That's not nothing. No, he said. It's not nothing. 5 years since the divorce. Long enough to stop counting the days. Not long enough to stop exactly how many there had been. He set the envelope on the corner of the workbench where it would stay for the rest of the morning, present without demanding anything, the way certain things stayed present without demanding anything. Then he went back to work. Because that was the thing about Delvon Hayes at 42 years old. 5 years out of a marriage that had ended in a courtroom on a Tuesday with signatures and cold voices and one sentence he had never fully put down. He worked, not as escape, not as avoidance, as the most honest thing he knew how to do with his hands and his time, and whatever he was feeling that he hadn't yet found words for. The shop on Dowling Street in 3rd Ward was called Hayes Restoration Works. He had painted the sign himself. Twice. The first time he'd used the wrong paint and it bled in the first rain. The second time he'd used exterior enamel and a steadier hand and stood back afterward for a long moment before going inside. It was not a large operation. 6 bays. Proper lifts. Tools organized by use frequency and weight, the way his father had taught him. Which meant every tool had a place and every place had a tool, and the absence of either was immediately visible and immediately addressed. He employed 4 full-time mechanics, had contracts with 3 private collectors and a museum in Dallas, specialized in restoration, real restoration, not the cosmetic kind where you put new paint on rusted bones and called it history preserved, the kind that required you to understand what something had been before you could decide what it deserved to become. He'd been in the Dowling Street building for 14 months. Before that, a small shop on Elgin Street that he'd outgrown not because he'd planned to outgrow it, but because the work had accumulated the way good work accumulated slowly, by reputation, by the specific gravity of doing things right in a world that increasingly rewarded doing things fast. The Cadillac DeVille in the Center Bay had been there 3 weeks. 1968, late production run. Original owner had been a dentist in Beaumont who'd bought it new and driven it for 11 years before putting it in storage, where it had spent the next 4 decades becoming a problem his grandson needed solved. The engine was fundamentally sound. The body had surface rust in 3 places. The interior needed everything. Delvon was working on the engine first. Because you always started with what you couldn't see. Because the visible damage was the easier problem. Because the thing that ran underneath everything else was the thing that actually mattered. Jordan Wade came in at 6:15, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the place on Alameda. She set one on the workbench and took the other to the desk in the corner that she had claimed on her 3rd day of employment and organized with a thoroughness that still mildly intimidated the full-time mechanics. She was 32 years old, former logistics officer, United States Army. She had the kind of posture that made people in meetings sit up straighter without understanding why, and the kind of eyes that had processed enough complexity in enough difficult conditions that they had become very quiet and very precise simultaneously. She had come to him 22 months ago with a resume and one sentence: "I'm better at this than anyone you'll find, and I'll prove it in 30 days, or you don't owe me the 2nd month's salary." He'd said, "Come back Tuesday." She'd come back Monday. He'd hired her before she'd taken her coat off. She ran everything that wasn't the actual mechanical work. Schedules, client contracts, supplier negotiations, the quiet, consistent architecture of an operation that functioned without drama, because she had personally eliminated the conditions that produced drama. They worked well together because neither of them required the other to explain themselves, which was why her silence about the envelope was the loudest thing in the room. "Say what you want to say," he told her. She didn't pretend she didn't know what he meant. "She wrote your name herself," Jordan said again. "On the inside. Not on the outside where the address goes. On the inside, where only you'd see it when you opened it. I noticed. That's a choice." "Yeah. People don't make that choice accidentally." "No," he said. "They don't." He set down the tool in his hand, looked at the envelope from across the workbench. "You think I should go?" he said. "I think there's something she needs you to know," Jordan said. "Or something she needs you to see. Either way, it's not nothing." He thought about that, picked up his coffee. It had already started going cold, which was what happened when you were thinking instead of drinking. "I haven't decided," he said. "Okay," Jordan said, and went to her desk, and started her day. And that was Jordan Wade in its purest form. She said the thing. She said it once. And then she left you alone with it. He went back to the carburetor. To understand what that envelope meant, what it actually meant, underneath the cream-colored paper, and the gold lettering and the handwriting that he would have recognized anywhere, you had to go back. Not all the way, just far enough to understand what had been built and how it had come apart and what had been left standing when everything else fell. Delvon Jerome Hayes grew up in 3rd Ward, the son of Robert Hayes, who worked 22 years as a mechanic at a shop on Blodgett Street before his back gave out, and Eleanor Hayes, who taught 5th grade at Blackshear Elementary and ran the Sunday school at Ebenezer Aim AE Church with the particular authority of a woman who had understood early that teaching was not a job, it was a calling, and callings didn't have office hours. They were not rich, they were not struggling either. They occupied the careful middle that required constant attention and no wasted anything, and Robert and Eleanor had built that life with deliberate hands and passed the deliberateness down to their son the way you pass down tools, not by explaining them, by putting them in his hands and showing him how. Robert taught Delvon engines. Eleanor taught him everything else. He went to Florida A&M on a partial scholarship and a summer job and money his parents had been quietly setting aside since before he could read. He studied mechanical engineering. Found that he was good at it, the way some people are good at things that feel less like learning and more like remembering, as though the knowledge had been in him all along, waiting for someone to hand him the context. He met Simone Carter in the fall of his junior year. She was standing in the parking lot of Gaither Gymnasium on a Tuesday evening in October, next to a 10-year-old Nissan Altima that was making a sound no Nissan Altima should make. Phone in her hand, weighing her options. She had the expression of a woman who preferred solving problems herself, but was not currently equipped to solve this one. Delvon was equipped. He crossed the lot, said, "That sound is your serpentine belt. It's either loose or breaking." She looked at him, then at the car, then back at him. "Can you fix it? You have a flashlight?" She had the app on her phone. He borrowed a belt from a guy in his dorm who kept a spare. because Delvon had told him to keep a spare 14 minutes. When it was done, she offered money. He said no. She offered dinner. He thought about it longer than he should have, then said yes. That was the beginning, and in the beginning it was the easiest thing. The way things are easy when you're young enough to confuse intensity for permanence and proximity for understanding, and the future is still a thing that seems entirely manageable because it hasn't started yet. She was studying education, wanted to teach eventually. Came from Atlanta, originally sweet Auburn neighborhood, the kind of family that had been in Atlanta long enough to remember what that street had meant and was determined their children would remember too. She talked about her grandmother often, the way certain food smelled on certain mornings, the way certain songs sounded in the right rooms. She was the first person Delvon had met who made him want to talk more than he usually wanted to talk. He was, by nature, a man of measured words. Not cold, not distant, economical. He said what needed saying and left room for what didn't. Most people found this unsettling. Simone found it a relief. You actually listen, she told him once early on. Like what I'm saying is the actual thing you're paying attention to. It is, he said. I know, she said. That's what I mean. They graduated in different years, her first, him a year behind. Stayed connected through that gap the way people stayed connected when they already knew the answer. She came to Houston because she had family there, an aunt in Sunnyside, and a teaching position at a school in 3rd Ward. He came home because Houston was home, because his father's health was beginning to slip in quiet ways, and because he had an idea about a shop that required the right neighborhood to work. They got married the year he turned 24. Small ceremony. Ebenezer AME. Eleanor Hayes cried in the contained way of a woman with strong feelings about public displays of emotion who had decided that some occasions warranted exceptions. Robert Hayes shook his son's hand afterward and held it a beat longer than a regular handshake. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them needed to. The first years were good. Better than good. Delvon opened the shop, a small space on Elgin Street then, not the Dowling building, and Simone taught, and they lived in an apartment in Eado and built a life that was genuinely theirs, assembled piece by piece, no shortcuts, no pretending. Then the shop got harder, slow at first. The way difficulty arrived when a neighborhood changed around you, and the clients who had come to you started going somewhere else somewhere, sought with a newer sign, a cleaner website, a face at the counter that looked more like the neighborhood was becoming and less like what it had been. Delvon didn't have a website worth mentioning. He had skill and reputation. He had always believed, because his father had always believed, that skill and reputation were enough. They were not always enough. Money got tight. They both knew it. Talked about it the way people talked about things they were both hoping would resolve themselves carefully, obliquely, as if looking at it too directly might make it worse. He didn't know then about Raymond Cross. Didn't know that while he was working late in the Elgin Street shop trying to figure out how to cover next month's rent and keep all 4 of his people employed, a man he'd never met was sitting in an office 43 floors up and looking at a map of 3rd Ward and thinking about which properties he needed and which people would need to be moved to get them. What he knew was that one Tuesday in March, a Tuesday that started like every other Tuesday and stopped being like every other Tuesday at approximately 4:17 in the afternoon, Simone came home and sat at the kitchen table and said she needed to talk. The conversation lasted 2 hours. He remembered the light moving across the kitchen floor during it. That specific thing. The afternoon sun shifting while they talked and him watching it shift. The way you fixed on small things when the large things were too large to look at directly. She said she was scared. About money, about the shop. About what the next 10 years looked like if things didn't change. He said he understood. He said he was working on it. She said she'd been talking to a financial advisor. Someone a colleague at school had recommended. The advisor had shown her projections, numbers, what the shop was worth, what it was likely to be worth. What the market looked like for small independent auto shops in neighborhoods that were changing as fast as theirs was changing. The numbers were bad, very bad. He asked to see them. She didn't have them. The advisor had the file. He said he'd like to meet with the advisor. She said she'd set something up, but the meeting never happened. Things moved faster than either of them anticipated, and in a direction that neither of them had chosen. And by June she had filed the papers, and by October a judge had reduced 12 years of marriage to a stack of documents, and one sentence that sat in him longer than anything else from that day. She hadn't whispered it. She'd said it at full volume in a courthouse hallway, while his attorney was still gathering papers. You were never going to be more than this, Delvon. I deserved someone who was actually going somewhere. He'd looked at her for a moment. Then he'd picked up his jacket and walked out. He hadn't answered. Not because he had nothing to say. Because he understood, in some part of himself that functioned very clearly under pressure, that answering would have been for her benefit, and she didn't deserve the satisfaction. And he didn't have the energy to perform anger for an audience of one. He found out about Raymond Cross almost 2 years later. Not by accident, by Jordan. 6 months before the cream-colored envelope appeared on his workbench, Jordan had come in on a Tuesday morning with a folder and set it on his desk and sat down across from him and said, "I need to show you something. Take your time with it." He'd looked at her. She wasn't a woman who used those words often. Take time. It meant what she was about to show him was going to require something beyond a quick read. He opened the folder. Raymond Cross, 57 years old. Financial advisor with a long association with Damon Whitfield's real estate operation, based downtown. Specialty. According to the documentation Jordan had assembled over 4 months of careful, deliberate investigation, identifying properties of interest in changing neighborhoods and engineering conditions that made acquisition more practical. The methods were not crude. They were sophisticated in the way that things were sophisticated when the person doing them understood exactly how much sophistication was required and applied precisely that amount and no more. One method involved approaching the lending institutions of target property owners with financial assessments that appeared legitimate, detailed, professionally formatted. The kind of document a banker would receive and accept without question, because it looked exactly like the kind of document bankers received from advisors they trusted. The assessments were fabricated, not entirely. They used real information, real numbers, real market data, assembled in a deliberately misleading way to project collapse where there was difficulty, to project failure where there was struggle, to take a business that was having a hard year and make it look, on paper, like a business that was already finished. 9 months before Simone filed for divorce, Raymond Cross had approached Delvon's bank with one of these assessments. The bank had tightened Delvon's credit line in response, and Simone had been shown the same assessment or a version of it by the financial advisor her colleague had recommended. A financial advisor who, Jordan's documentation showed, had received a referral fee from Raymond Cross's operation. Delvon had read the whole folder twice, then closed it, set it on the desk, looked at Jordan. 4 months, he said. Give or take. You did this yourself. I had some help. But mostly yes. He was quiet for a moment. She didn't know the document was false, he said. No evidence she did. She saw numbers that looked real, that told her what she was already afraid of. He looked at the folder, and she made a decision based on them. Yes. Not the decision she thought she was making. No, Jordan said. Not that one. He sat with that for a long time. Long enough that Jordan had finished her coffee and was halfway through a second one before he said anything else. What are you going to do with this? She asked. He thought about it honestly. Nothing. Yet. She needs to find it herself. He looked at the folder without opening it again. If I bring it to her, it's my version of her life. She needs it to be her own reckoning, her own truth. A pause. Otherwise it doesn't change anything that matters. Jordan looked at him the way she sometimes looked at him. The expression of a woman deciding whether what she was seeing was wisdom or stubbornness or some combination of the two that she hadn't fully categorized yet. She'd told him once about 8 months into working for him that she'd never met anyone who was so consistently right about things in ways that were also consistently infuriating. He'd said he'd take it. She'd said that was exactly what she meant. Now she picked up the folder, put it in the locked drawer of her desk where she kept things that mattered too much for the regular filing system. Okay, she said, and went back to work. And he went back to work. And 6 months passed. The morning was deep into itself by the time Delvon Hayes called. Delvon was on the second hour of the DeVille's engine when his phone rang and her name appeared on the screen, and he wiped his hands and answered because he always answered when his mother called, even when he was in the middle of something. Especially then. "You don't sound busy," she said. "I'm always busy." "That's not an accomplishment, it's a habit." Her voice had the quality it always had, warm and measured in the specific way of a woman who had spent 30 years teaching children that words had weight and had never stopped believing it herself. "I heard something." He waited. "About a party," she said. "How?" "Ebenezer Amy. 40 years. I hear everything." A pause. "The question is whether my son is planning to do something I'm going to have to pray about on his behalf. I haven't decided anything. The fact that you haven't told me to mind my business tells me you've been thinking about this since the envelope arrived." He didn't answer. "Delvon, I said I haven't decided. Then let me help you decide." Another pause. The kind she deployed when she was about to say the thing she'd been carrying. "If you go to that party and you show them a man who is angry or proving something or waiting for someone to acknowledge what they did to you, that is what they will remember. That is the only story they will tell. I'm not angry. I know. I haven't been angry for a long time. I know that too." Her voice went quieter. Not softer. Quieter. "That's the part that worries me." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means a man who has truly let something go doesn't need to go back to the place it happened and stand in it." She paused. "Unless he's looking for something." "I'm not looking for anything." "Then what are you doing?" He looked at the envelope on the corner of the workbench.
"There's a question,"
he said,
"that I never got an answer to, a real answer." "What question?"
He was quiet. "Why she left when she did," he said finally. "Not the reasons she gave. The real one. I want to look at her and understand it." His mother was quiet on her end. The kind of quiet that meant she was deciding whether to push or let go. She let go. "Don't let them see you want something," she said. "Whatever you're looking for, don't let them see you need it." "I don't need it. Make sure your face knows that," he almost answered. Then didn't. Because she was right and they both knew it, and saying so would have been redundant. "I'll call you Sunday," he said. "You'll call me Saturday night." "Mama." "You'll call me Saturday night," she said again. Not a question. Not a negotiation. Just a fact she was making available to him in advance. "Good night, baby." She hung up. He stood by the workbench for a moment with his phone in his hand, looking at nothing specifically. Then he put the phone in his pocket, went back to the engine. Celeste Brooks had arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in November, 11 months after the divorce was finalized, and 4 months after Delvon had moved the last of his things out of the apartment in Ayado and into the 2 rooms above the Elgin Street shop that he was calling home without much conviction. He had been in a bad stretch. Not catastrophic. He wasn't a man who allowed things to become catastrophic, but bad in the persistent, low-grade way that was in some ways harder to manage than a crisis, because a crisis had edges, had a shape you could work against, while persistent difficulty just kept being there, slightly different each day, wearing you down without ever giving you something specific to push back against. He'd lost 2 regular clients that month. The shop's line of credit had been tightened by the bank in a way that his banker had explained apologetically, but hadn't fully explained the reasoning for. He was covering payroll but not much else. Eating badly. Sleeping in 4-hour installments. Telling himself it was temporary. One afternoon in November, the Elgin Street shop door opened and a woman walked in. 70s. Tall in the way some women were tall, not just height but bearing, the way they organized the air around them. Silver hair cut close to her head. Dressed simply but with the precision of someone who had been making deliberate choices about how they appeared for a very long time. She drove a Lincoln Continental, 1964, navy blue, chrome, white walls. Engine running clean but with something in the transmission. A slight hesitation on second gear that most people would ignore and the right person would find unacceptable. She was clearly the right person. Delvon was in the middle of something else. He told her he'd be right with her. She said, "Take your time." She sat in the single chair that constituted his waiting area and opened a book she'd brought with her and read. He finished what he was doing, washed his hands, came to the Continental, looked at the car before he looked at her. "Second gear," he said. "Yes." "How long?" 3 weeks. Maybe 4. It bothers you." It wasn't a question. She answered it like it wasn't. Of course it bothers me. He asked her how long she'd had it. 31 years, she said. Her late husband had bought it new and garaged it in Beaumont. She'd brought it home after he died because she wasn't going to leave it in Beaumont. He understood that without needing it explained. He said he'd need a full day with it. She said fine. He asked if she needed a ride. She said no. She settled back into the chair with her book and read for the next 3 hours while he worked on the Continental. At some point, maybe 2 hours in, he looked up and noticed her reading. Still, completely at ease. Not checking her phone. Not watching him work. Just reading. With the patience of a woman who had waited for important things often enough to understand that waiting done right was its own kind of presence. When he was done, she came and stood beside the car and listened while he explained what he'd found and what he'd done. She asked 2 questions, both precise. His answers satisfied her. She paid him more than he'd asked. He said the amount was too much. She said, "You looked at where this car came from before you looked at what it needed. That's worth more than you charged me." He started to answer. She was already getting into the car. She came back the following week, and the week after that. Small things usually, but she came back, and she sat in the chair and read, and he worked, and once in a while one of them said something and the other responded, and in this way, slowly, a conversation accumulated. She told him she had a collection. Her grandfather had started it. Her father had added to it. Her husband had added more. She had continued after her husband was gone, because the collection was the closest thing to a conversation with all of them that she still had access to. He asked how many. 41, she said. He thought she was being approximate. She was not being approximate. I've been looking for someone, she said. On the afternoon, she told him about the collection, who understands the difference between what something is worth and what it deserves. He looked at her. Those aren't the same question, he said. No, she agreed. They are not. He took the job. It took him into a world he hadn't known existed, private collectors, museum curators, the specific and serious community of people who cared about old vehicles, not for their investment value but for what they represented. Craftsmanship, history, the specific testimony of objects that had been made well and maintained well, and had survived into a time that didn't always understand why that mattered. The work changed things. Not overnight, gradually. The way real changes happened slowly, and then all at once, and then you looked back and realized the slow part had been doing more than it seemed. By the time Celeste mentioned, on an otherwise ordinary afternoon, that she had been ill and that it would be progressing. The Elgin Street shop had become the Dowling Street building, and Delvon had 6 bays and a staff and contracts with institutions that had once seemed impossibly remote. She had told him straightforwardly, the way she told him everything. He'd visited her twice in the hospital. The second visit was the last one. She'd said, "When the time comes, talk to my brother Everett. He'll find you." About what? He'd asked. About what's next, she said. For the collection. He hadn't pushed further. He'd held her hand for a while. Then he'd left. 3 weeks later she was gone, and he'd stood at the back of First Antioch Baptist during her service, the building packed, the music extraordinary, and felt the particular grief of losing someone who had seen something in you before you'd fully seen it in yourself. Everett Brooks had not yet reached out. Not yet. Delvon set his coffee cup down on the workbench. Looked at it. Cold. He'd been holding it and thinking instead of drinking it, which was something he did more than he should. He looked at the envelope. He looked at the DeVille, with its hood up and its engine half exposed, and the work that was waiting for him with the patience of a thing that didn't have anywhere else to be. He thought about his mother's voice on the phone. Make sure your face knows it. He thought about Jordan sitting at her desk 12 feet away, not looking at him, not asking anything, waiting in the competent and unhurried way she had, of waiting for him to arrive at his own conclusions. He thought about a Tuesday afternoon in March and light moving across a kitchen floor. He thought about the courthouse hallway, the sentence he'd walked away from without answering. He picked up his coffee.
Drank it cold. Set it back down.
Jordan, he said. She looked up from her screen. Saturday, he said. I'm going. She nodded once. The nod of a woman who had known this since she'd watched him read his name in Simone's handwriting and not say anything and go back to work. "I'll need to leave by 6:30, he said. "I'll move the Callaway pickup to Friday morning. And I want the Keystone Capital documents by end of day Saturday. Whatever their final answer is, I want it in my hands before I walk into that party." She made a note. "Anything else?" He looked at the DeVille, at the workbench, at the envelope, at the empty space past the third bay where he'd been thinking, lately not seriously yet, just thinking about what else the building could hold, what else it could be used, what else it could be used for. Whether there was something more that could happen here than the restoration of vehicles for people who already had resources enough to bring them to him. Whether the things his father had put in his hands were things that could be put in other hands. Whether that was the next right step or just something he was considering to avoid thinking about Saturday. He wasn't sure yet. He went back to the engine. Because the engine was what was in front of him. Because you worked on what was in front of you, and you trusted that the next thing would become clear when it was time for it to be clear. Because that was how his father had done it. Because that was how everything worth doing had always been done. One thing at a time. With attention. With honest hands. The rest could wait. The afternoon went the way Thursday afternoons went in the shop, steady, quiet, accumulating. 2 of his mechanics came in at noon and worked through to closing. A client called about a pickup date that Jordan rescheduled without involving Delvon. A supplier confirmed delivery of parts that had been on back order for 6 weeks. The ordinary machinery of a day that was doing what days did. Delvon stayed on the DeVille. He thought about the courthouse hallway less than he expected to, which told him something. He wasn't sure yet what it told him, but he filed it away in the part of his mind that he trusted to know what to do with things when the time came. At 5:47 he locked the shop, walked to the parking lot, stood beside the F-100, Ford 1971. The original color was something the manufacturer had called Acapulco Blue, which was a name that sounded better than the color looked at this point in its life. The paint had oxidized at the edges and in patches across the hood and along the lower doors. One headlight was slightly brighter than the other because of a wiring issue he'd been meaning to address for the better part of a year. The driver's door opened cleanly. The passenger door needed a slight upward lift of the handle to catch right. He'd bought it in 2019 for $1,100 from a man in Galveston who had used it as a work truck for a landscaping business until the business changed and the truck no longer fit the operation. He'd driven it home, replaced the brake lines, the belts, the fuel filter, and 3 of the 4 tires. Done everything else himself on weekend mornings over the course of 4 months. It ran. He'd had conversations, more than once, with Jordan about why he still drove it. She found it baffling in the way she found everything baffling that wasn't optimally efficient. "You own a company," she had said, approximately 6 months into working for him. "I know, a company that makes real money. I know, you could drive literally anything. I know that too, so why?" He'd looked at the truck for a moment. "Because it's mine," he'd said. "I know exactly where every part of it came from. I know what I put in it and when and why. It doesn't have any story on it that isn't true." She'd looked at the truck, then at him. "That is both the most understandable thing you've ever said and the most you," she'd told him. He'd taken that as a compliment. Now he put his hand on the roof of the cab, the metal warm from the afternoon sun. He stood there for a moment with his palm flat against it. Not sentiment, not performance. Just acknowledging the presence of a thing that had carried him when he needed carrying, and had never once asked him to be anything other than what he was. He got in, started the engine. It turned over the way it always turned over, not smooth, not troubled, just itself, making the sound that it made, doing what it did. He pulled out of the lot onto Dowling and headed north. Third Ward was doing what it always did at this hour, living. The barber shop on the corner where the same man had cut hair for 30 years was still lit inside, 2 chairs occupied, the sound of it coming through the propped open door. The church on the block passed, that Ebenezer A.M., his mother's church, his church from birth until he'd let the habit slip in the years of the marriage, and the years after had its sign lit out front. Sunday service 9 and 11. All are welcome. He slowed without meaning to, looked at the sign, then kept going. He drove home on the long way, down Emancipation, and then cutting back through the part of the neighborhood that was still recognizably itself, still carrying the specific weight of what it had always been. The streets named for what they remembered. The houses that had been here through everything. He drove past the block where his father's shop had been. Blodgett Street. The building was something else now, a juice bar, with a different sign and a different purpose, and no indication that anything had come before it. He didn't stop. He just drove past. Let it be what it was. A place that had been one thing and had become another thing. Which was not a tragedy. It was just time doing what time did. He got home, climbed the stairs, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table. He didn't open his phone, didn't turn on anything. Just sat in the quiet of an apartment that was his, genuinely his, assembled from his own choices, carrying no story that wasn't true. Outside, Emancipation Avenue was settling into its evening. Quieter, still present. He thought about Saturday, about what he was looking for, about whether he'd recognize it when he found it, about the question he'd been carrying for 5 years that had no clean answer and might not have one, and whether the absence of a clean answer was something you eventually set down, or something that became part of what you carried so completely that you stopped noticing the weight.
He thought about his father's hands.
About the specific shape of them at the end of a long day, the way grease settled into the lines of his knuckles, no matter how long he washed. The way those hands had shown Delvon, the first engine he'd ever worked on, piece by piece, named each part, explained its purpose, demonstrated what it did and why it mattered and what happened when it was ignored. You just worked, his father used to say. When Delvon was young and impatient and wanted to know when the results would come and when the struggle would ease and when the thing he was building would finally become the thing he could see it becoming, you just worked. And the work was the thing. He drank his coffee while it was still warm, looked at the wall, thought about the empty space past the third bay in the Dowling Street shop, about the thought that had been forming slowly for months, without his permission, the thought about what else the building could hold, what else the work could mean, whether the tools his father had put in his hands were tools that needed to move forward, not ready yet. But coming, he went to bed, and at 5:31 he was already awake, already dressed, because that was who he was, and Saturday was coming, and he was going to show up exactly as himself, which was, he had decided, the only version of victory that actually meant anything. The estate sat at the end of a private road off Memorial Drive. Delvon had driven past this kind of address before. Everyone in Houston had. The kind of neighborhood where the street names changed from numbers to words, and the lots got wider and the trees got older, and everything got quieter, in a way that wasn't peaceful so much as deliberate. Quiet as a statement. Quiet as a locked door. He turned onto the drive at 6:47 in the evening. The sun was still up, just barely, hanging low over Buffalo Bayou, throwing long gold light across the water, and the manicured lawn, and the line of cars that stretched almost to the road. Black cars mostly. One silver one. A white one near the back, all of them gleaming. All of them the kind of vehicle that had never once made an unexpected sound. And then the F-100. Sky blue. Paint oxidized at the edges. One headlight slightly brighter than the other, because of a wiring issue Delvon had been meaning to address for 8 months. Exhaust pipe that sang its own particular note on hills. He pulled in behind the white car and cut the engine. For a moment he just sat there, not gathering courage. He didn't need courage. Courage implied fear, and he wasn't afraid of a party. He was just sitting the way he always sat for a moment before walking into something, taking one breath, reminding himself why he was here and what he wasn't here to do. Not here to fight, not here to prove, not here to perform anything for anyone. Here because Simone Carter had written his name in her own handwriting, and he needed to understand why. He got out. The valet was a young man in a white shirt and black slacks who came around the corner of the driveway with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this all evening. He saw the truck, stopped walking. His face did the thing that faces do when they encounter something that doesn't match the pattern, a brief recalibration, the expression resetting into professional neutrality, but not quite fast enough. Delvon handed him the key. "Passenger door needs a little lift when you open it," he said. Pull the handle, then lift. Otherwise it sticks. The valet looked at the key, looked at the truck, looked at Delvon. Yes, sir, he said, carefully, like he was confirming he'd been given instructions he wasn't sure he'd be following. Delvon walked toward the house. The sound hit him first. String quartet, somewhere past the main entrance. The kind of music chosen for occasions like this, beautiful in a general way, specific to nothing, designed to fill space without demanding attention. Then voices. Then laughter. The particular laughter of people at events like this, which is different from regular laughter, more performative, louder than it needs to be. He came through the entrance and into the main garden. White tents, lights strung between them, just starting to matter as the sun pulled down. Round tables dressed in cream linen. Flowers he couldn't name, but that smelled expensive. Waitstaff moving through the crowd with silver trays, and the invisible skill of people who had learned to be present and unnoticed at the same time. And people, 80, maybe 90 of them, all dressed, all turned toward each other in the practiced geometry of people who do this often enough to know exactly how to stand, and how to hold a glass, and how to laugh at the right moment. Delvon scanned the crowd once, found Simone before she found him. She was near the fountain. Of course, near the fountain. She had always gravitated toward water. At parties he remembered that, from a lifetime thing ago, from the 2 or 3 faculty events he'd attended with her when she was still teaching, and he was the husband in the corner who was politely uninteresting to everyone else there. But she was not uninteresting. Lord, the dress was black, form-fitting, the kind that didn't apologize for anything. Neckline deep enough to make a statement, hemline that stopped above the knee. Her toes were bare in heeled sandals, gold straps that crossed at the ankle. Hair down, straight, pulled to one side so it fell across her left shoulder and left her right shoulder bare, and the gold earrings long, dangling, catching the last of the evening light, moved when she moved, and she moved the way some women move when they know exactly what they look like, and they've made peace with it. Honey brown skin. Lips the color of dark berries. Eyes that could cut glass when she was paying attention. And she was paying attention, because she'd already found him. She'd been watching for him. He knew it from the way her face didn't change when their eyes met. No surprise, no flinch, no theatrical widening. Just the steady look of a woman who had been waiting and was now finished waiting. Neither of them moved toward the other. Not yet. The whispers started within 60 seconds. He heard them the way you hear things at a party, when you're not part of a conversation arriving in fragments. Words lifting out of the ambient noise like birds from a wire. Isn't that? Didn't he used to? I thought he was still driving that he let them talk. A waiter materialized at his elbow with a tray of champagne. Delvon took a glass of water instead. Cold. Real ice. He was grateful for that. He found a position near the far edge of the garden where he could see the fountain and the main tent and the entrance all at once. He stood there with his water, and he watched. Not hungrily, not bitterly, just watching the way he watched an engine, interested, patient, waiting for the thing that would tell him something he needed to know. He'd been there maybe 12 minutes when he heard his name. Mr. Hayes. He turned. The man was in his late 60s. Solid build, gone slightly soft with age, but not apologetically so. Gray at the temples and through his close-cropped beard. Dressed simply, but in the way that only reads as simple when you look closely enough to realize how good everything is. Dark blazer. Open collar. No jewelry except for a watch that told time without announcing anything. His eyes were the thing. Sharp and warm simultaneously, which is a difficult combination that usually only comes with age. I'm sorry, Delvon said. I don't think we've met. We haven't. The man extended his hand. Everett Brooks. The name took a half-second to land. Then it landed. Delvon went still in the way he went still when something important happened. Not visibly. Just internally a settling, a careful attention. Celeste's brother, he said. Her younger brother. By 4 years. Everett's grip was firm. The kind that came from a lifetime of handshakes that meant something. She talked about you often. She shouldn't have. Don't do that, Everett said. Not unkindly. Just directly. She talked about you because you were worth talking about. Those were her words. And she didn't say things she didn't mean. Delvon looked at him. No, he agreed. She didn't. I've been looking for you for 4 months. The statement was so matter-of-fact that it took a moment to register. 4 months. This man had been looking for him for 4 months. Why here? Delvon asked. How did you know I'd be? I didn't. Everett smiled. Small and real. I've been making inquiries. About where you'd be. When I might be able to find you in a context where we could actually speak. He paused. I was invited to this event by Damon Whitfield. We have some business associations. When I saw the guest list and noticed your name, I thought perhaps the moment had found itself. Delvon looked at him carefully. What moment? Everett reached into the inside pocket of his blazer, came out with a plain white envelope, smaller than the one Simone had sent, heavier. Celeste left very specific instructions, he said, about the collection, about what she wanted to happen to it. He held the envelope for a moment without offering it. She also left specific instructions about when these instructions should be delivered, and to whom, in what order. He looked at Delvon steadily. I wasn't to give you this until I'd seen you in a situation where you understood who you were. Delvon looked at the envelope, then at Everett. And you think this is that situation? I think, Everett said carefully, that you walked into a party where you weren't supposed to feel welcome, driving a truck people are already whispering about, and you haven't once checked your phone or looked for someone to stand next to. You're just standing here, watching. A pause. That's the man she described. Delvon didn't take the envelope yet. She knew she was sick when she asked about the collection, he said. For about a year before she told you. Yes. She didn't say anything. She wasn't ready for you to treat her differently. She wanted to finish the work first. He thought about that. About those last few visits to the facility in Katy. About Celeste moving between the cars with the same deliberate care she always had, pointing out details, asking questions. Occasionally resting her hand on a fender or a hood with the lightness of someone saving their energy. Saving it. She passed 14 months ago, Everett said. I've been organizing her affairs since then. This is one of the last things. Delvon took the envelope. He held it without opening it. She told me you'd know when to open it, Everett said. That was her instruction. She said you'd know. He put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. Everett nodded once, as if something had been settled. Across the garden, Damon Whitfield was moving toward the center of the main tent. Someone handed him a microphone. The string quartet faded out. Damon Whitfield was a tall man, good-looking in the way of men who have been looked at their whole lives and have organized themselves around it. Custom suit, dark gray, watch that you'd notice before his face. Cufflinks. The shoes his mother had mentioned on the phone, she was right. They were the kind that cost more than practical things. He held the microphone with the ease of a man for whom rooms had always quieted when he spoke. I want to thank every single one of you, he said. And his voice was good too. Deep, trained maybe, or just naturally the kind of sound that made people lean in slightly. For being here, for celebrating with us tonight. He smiled, and the smile was perfectly calibrated, warm but not too warm. Personal but not too personal. I've had a lot of success in this city, and I want you to know that I understand what success requires. It requires clarity, it requires ambition, and it requires the courage to outgrow your limitations. Applause. Some people, Damon continued, his voice thoughtful now, like he was sharing something he'd actually considered, look at the ceiling there under and mistake it for the sky. More applause. Laughter from a few. We are not those people. Delvon watched him, and Damon, in the middle of the applause, let his gaze settle on Delvon for exactly one beat. One beat. Deliberate. Then he looked away. Delvon didn't look away. He held his water and he watched Damon look away, and he thought, there it is. There's the reason for the banter. There's the flag being planted. He wants the room to see it. Fine. Let them see. He found his table after the speech. Card number 11. He walked through the arrangement, found it near the back, near the service exit. 3 empty chairs. 1 small candle in the center that had apparently given up on the evening and was doing its best impression of dying with dignity. A server appeared beside him almost instantly. Young woman. Couldn't have been more than 23. Her face was doing something complicated, the expression of someone who had been told to apologize, but hadn't been told exactly how. Sir, I'm so sorry about the placement. It's fine, he said. The original arrangement was changed this morning. And, it's fine, he said again. And he meant it. He sat down. She looked at him like she was waiting for him to be angrier. I once ate lunch on the hood of a '72 Buick in a parking lot in July, he said. This is fine. She almost smiled, caught herself, brought him water and bread and disappeared. He ate. The food was good. He'd give them that. Whatever else was happening, whoever had catered this event understood food. He was finishing his salad when he heard the Porsche. He didn't see it, but he heard it, the specific engine note of Jordan's Cayenne cutting off in the drive, and then a brief silence, and then the sound of heels on stone. The energy in the garden shifted before she came through the entrance. That was the thing about Jordan Wade. She didn't enter spaces. She arrived in them. There was a difference. Arriving implied that you had been somewhere else, and now you were here, and the here was taking note. She was in a deep navy blazer over a silk shell, fitted dark trousers, heels that added 2 inches she didn't need, hair pulled back tight in a way that made her cheekbones look architectural. She was carrying a leather portfolio and her phone, and the expression of someone who had 3 things to tell him and was prioritizing them in her head as she walked. She came through the crowd without stopping, directly to table 11, set the portfolio down, sat across from him. Sorry I'm late. What happened? Keystone Capital called right as I was leaving. Wanted to go over the final terms before sending the signed copies. She opened the portfolio, pulled out a sheaf of documents, slid them across the table. They signed. All of it. He looked at the documents, the bottom line, the terms. He'd built something, piece by piece, engine by engine, year by year. And here were 40 pages saying that what he'd built was worth what he'd always known it was worth. He looked up from the documents and happened to catch the eye of the man. At the nearest occupied table, one of Damon's associates, he assumed, from the way the man had been positioned near Damon all evening. The man was looking at the portfolio, then at Delvon, then at Jordan, then back at Delvon with the expression of someone doing arithmetic they weren't expecting to have to do. Also, Jordan said, and her voice dropped a fraction. Raymond Cross is here. Delvon set the documents down. Where? Table 3. Green tie. He's been watching you since you came in. He didn't turn immediately, made himself finish the thought he was in the middle of. Then, slowly he let his gaze move across the room toward table 3. Raymond Cross was 57 years old. Average height. The kind of build that had probably been athletic once, and had settled into something that still looked capable. He was well-dressed in the way that financial men were well-dressed, conservative, expensive, everything communicating competence and trustworthiness. His face, when he found Delvon's, was the face of a man who was deciding something quickly. Delvon held the look for 3 full seconds. Then he went back to his salad. He knows you know, Jordan said. He's known since you started pulling the thread. Delvon took a drink of water. He's been waiting to see what I do with it. What are you going to do with it? Not tonight. He looked at her. Have you eaten? She blinked. Have I? Eaten. Food. Tonight, I had a granola bar in the car. He waved the server over and ordered Jordan a plate. She watched him do this with the expression she sometimes got when he did something that she'd been working herself up to comment on, and then didn't need to comment on because he'd handled it. The documents are good, he said. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank the 6 years of financial projections I made them look at. He almost smiled. The server brought Jordan's food. Jordan ate with the efficiency of a former military officer, which meant quickly, and without ceremony and with full attention. He's still watching you, she said. Let him. It's making him nervous. Good. Is that strategic or are you just? Both, he said. She nodded, went back to eating. He was refilling his water when he saw Simone moving toward him. She was coming from the direction of the main tent, which meant she'd left Damon's side, which meant she'd made a choice to do that. She was moving with the specific walk of a woman who had made a decision, and was in the process of executing it before she could change her mind. He stood when she got close, not because protocol demanded it, because his mother had taught him to. Walk with me, she said. Not a question. They went toward the far end of the garden, where the lawn opened up and the lights were fewer, and the sound of the bayou was just barely audible. Enough away from everything that the voices of the party became ambient. Not gone. Just far enough. She stopped near the stone railing at the garden's edge. For a moment she just stood there, hands around her glass. Looking at the water, he waited. Because he was good at waiting. Because waiting, when you knew what you were waiting for, wasn't passive, it was a form of attention. And he was paying very close attention. I found something, she said. Her voice was different out here, different from the voice she used in public settings, which was smooth and controlled in the way of someone who had learned to perform competence. This was the voice he remembered from late evenings in their kitchen, the voice that knew it didn't have to perform for him. In Damon's office, 3 weeks ago, she looked at her glass. Not at him. Not yet. I was looking for a lease document for something unrelated. I found a folder in the back of the filing cabinet. Old. I almost didn't look at it. He said nothing. Your name was on the tab. Still, nothing. Inside was a financial assessment of your shop. Dated 6 years ago. She finally looked at him. The month before I started talking to the advisor. The month before I saw the projections. The projections. He remembered her describing them. The numbers that had looked so bad. The trajectory that had looked so certain. The assessment in that folder, she said slowly, like she was still working through it, was the source. It was the original document, and it wasn't. She stopped. Started again. The numbers in it weren't your actual numbers. I could tell because by then I'd seen your real financial records. During the divorce, I knew what your shop actually looked like. She looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has solved a puzzle they wish they hadn't needed to solve. They made it up, she said. He held the railing. Delvon. I know, he said. She went very still. What? I know, he said again. Jordan found it 6 months ago. She traced it back to Raymond Cross, documented the whole thing. The silence was specific, the kind with weight. 6 months, she said. Finally. Yes. And you didn't. She stopped. You didn't say anything. You didn't call me. You didn't. Why? He turned to look at her then. Full attention. The kind he'd always given her. The kind she'd told him once was the thing she noticed first about him. That he listened like he actually heard. Because it needed to be yours, he said. If I came to you with it, it would have been something I handed you. Something I could hold over you even if I never meant to. That's not what I wanted. A pause. I wanted you to find it. Or not find it. Either way, that had to be your path. Not mine to hand you. She stared at him. You waited. Yes. You just waited. Yes. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Wasn't quite anything else either. It was the sound of a woman confronting something that didn't fit any category she'd prepared for. I spent 5 years, she said. Her voice low now. 5 years thinking I made a rational decision. That I saw the facts and I acted on the facts. She looked at the water, and the facts were constructed. By someone who needed me to leave so he could get your land. Yes. And you knew this for 6 months. Yes. Delvon. She was looking at him now, like she wasn't sure what she was looking at. What kind of person just waits for that? He looked out at the bayou, the last light off the water. The kind who spent a lot of time around old engines, he said. You don't rush them. You let them work through at their own pace. She was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry, she said. He turned back to her. I'm sorry, she said again. And this time it wasn't the public version. Not the smooth one. This was the voice from the kitchen. I should have come to you first. Before any advisor. Before anyone. I should have looked at you and said, I'm scared, and this is what I'm afraid of, and what do we do? I didn't do that. No, he agreed. You didn't. I convinced myself I was being practical. That I was protecting myself. You were scared. People make bad choices when they're scared. That's not unusual. I left you, she said. That's not nothing. No, he said. It's not nothing. She looked at her hands, at the glass she was holding, at nothing specific. What do you want from me? She asked. Nothing, he said. I came here because you wrote my name yourself. I wanted to understand why. I needed a witness, she said. I needed someone there who knew the whole truth, who would know what it meant when it fell apart. He looked at her. You knew it was going to fall apart. Tonight. I suspected, she said. Damon's been getting calls. Nervous calls. The kind of calls you get when something is coming apart at the seams and you can hear the thread. She paused. I wanted someone in that room who would understand what they were actually seeing. He thought about that, and you chose me. Who else would I choose? He didn't answer that, because the answer was complicated and this wasn't the moment for complicated. You should go back in, he said. She looked at him. What about you? I'll be along. She nodded once. Then she walked back toward the lights and the noise and the string quartet and the man she was about to stop being engaged to. He stood at the railing for a moment longer. The bayou was dark now, moving, making its usual sound that was not silence but was quiet, in the way that water is always quiet even when it's moving. He put his hand in his jacket pocket, felt the edge of Everett's envelope. Not yet. He turned and walked back toward the garden. The news hit the party the way these things hit parties, not all at once, but in pulses. First one person checked a phone, then another. Then a small cluster near the bar went suddenly quiet, and then the quiet spread outward like rings in water, until it reached the edges. Delvon noticed it from near table 11. He watched the faces change, the particular progression from social ease to confusion to something more serious. He'd seen that progression before, in different contexts. It was the look of people whose assumptions were being revised. He picked up his water glass, watched Raymond Cross across the room. Raymond's phone had been out before most other people's. He'd been checking it every 4 minutes since Jordan arrived. Now he was reading something, and his face was doing what faces do when the thing you feared would happen has happened, and you're calculating distance to the exit. 3 of the men near Damon stood up from their table, with the synchronized moved people who'd gotten the same message at the same time, and were in agreement about what it meant. One of them said something to Damon's assistant. The assistant moved toward Damon quickly, trying not to look like he was moving quickly. Jordan appeared at Delvon's shoulder. Damon's Fifth Ward project, she said, without preamble. It's been frozen by 3 of his primary lenders, pending an investigation. Accounting irregularities. The news broke about 8 minutes ago. Delvon looked at the room. Raymond's walking toward the exit, Jordan added. I see him. Do you want to know? She waited. Let him go, Delvon said. His problem is bigger than tonight. He watched Raymond Cross move through the crowd, unhurried on the surface, moving with purpose underneath. The walk of a man who had been calculating exits for a long time and had this one already mapped. Everett Brooks materialized on Delvon's other side. He looked at the room with the calm attention of someone who had seen many things come apart over many years and had developed the long view. Interesting evening, Everett said. More interesting than I expected, Delvon said. Across the garden, Damon Whitfield was receiving information from 2 directions simultaneously. His face was doing its best to hold its shape. It was losing. My offer still stands, Everett said, quietly, not making a production of it. Whatever Celeste laid out in that letter, it's still there, still waiting. The only variable was whether you were ready. Delvon looked at him. And you think I am? I think you came to a party where people were planning to look down at you. I think you've been standing here for 2 hours being exactly who you are. No performance. No defense. Everett paused. That's ready. Delvon touched the envelope in his pocket. I'll open it when I'm home, he said. Everett nodded like that was the right answer. And then Damon was walking toward them. Not toward Everett, toward Delvon. The polish was still there. It was thick enough that it didn't come off in one evening. But something underneath it had shifted. You could see it if you were paying attention. The weight of a man who had been very sure of something, and had just been shown the cost of that certainty. He stopped in front of Delvon. Everett excused himself quietly. I need to talk to you, Damon said. All right, Delvon said. They walked to the far edge of the property, down a stone path to where the lawn ended at the bayou, the water moving below them. Damon stood with his hands at his sides, looking at the water, taking his time. Raymond Cross, he said finally. I want you to know I didn't direct him. I know, Delvon said. Damon looked at him. I know he acted on his own initiative. That doesn't mean you didn't benefit from it. A long pause. No, Damon said. It doesn't mean that. And when you found out what he'd done, I was already in the position where stopping it would have meant dismantling things I'd spent years building. He said it with the flatness of a man past the point of self-justification, just stating what was true. So you let it stand. I let it stand. The bayou moved. Delvon looked at the water. I didn't come here for this conversation, he said. I want you to know that. I didn't come here to get your confession or to watch your evening go sideways. Why did you come? Because Simone asked me to. Damon looked at him with the expression of a man fitting a last piece into a picture he'd almost finished. She found the folder, he said. 3 weeks ago. And she called you. She wrote my name on a card. Damon exhaled slowly, not dramatically. Just breathing. She's been looking at me differently since then, he said. I thought I was imagining it. You weren't. Another silence. I built something real, Damon said. And for the first time all evening he didn't sound like a man performing certainty. He sounded like a man stating a fact he needed someone else to acknowledge. The Fifth Ward project, some of it was real. Some of it was going to matter. I believe that, Delvon said. Damon looked at him. You do. I do. I think you built some real things, and some of how you built them was wrong. Those two things can both be true. Damon was quiet for a long moment. The investigation is going to be thorough, he said. I expect it will be. Raymond will be the first thing they pull on. He'll pull a lot of things with him. Damon nodded slowly, accepting something. I'm sorry, he said. For what happened to your marriage? For the shop. Stop, Delvon said. Not harshly. Just firmly. Don't apologize to me tonight. Tonight you've got other things to manage. Apologize when it matters. In front of the people it matters to. In writing if necessary. Damon looked at him. You're a strange man, he said. People tell me that. You could have. He stopped. Started again. Most men in your position would want to. I know what most men would want, Delvon said. I'm not interested in that. A pause. What are you interested in? Damon asked. Delvon looked out at the bayou, at the lights of the city reflecting off the water. I'm interested in going home, in finishing the Cadillac I've been working on, in opening my shop Monday morning. He put his hands in his pockets. And in reading a letter that someone left for me, he added, who spent a lot of time thinking about what she wanted to say. He left Damon at the railing, walked back up the stone path toward the lights. The party was quieter now. The kind of quiet that settles after something has happened that everyone felt, but nobody has fully named yet. The string quartet was still playing, but people weren't listening to it the same way. He found Jordan at the edge of the garden. Simone is inside, she said. Far table, I saw. Raymond left 20 minutes ago. I know. There are 3 people from Whitfield Development who are going to be having a very long night. I know that too. He looked at her. Thank you for coming. You needed the documents. I needed more than the documents, and you knew that. She held his gaze for a moment. Don't make me say something sentimental. It's bad for my reputation. He almost smiled. Go find Simone, Jordan said. Say whatever needs to be said. He went inside. He found her at a table near the window. Not the far table Jordan had mentioned. She'd moved. Simone Carter was now sitting at a small round table near the glass wall that looked out over the bayou, and she was sitting alone, which in a room of 80 people at a party celebrating her engagement meant something specific and deliberate. She had her champagne glass in front of her, hadn't touched it. He pulled out the chair across from her, sat down. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Outside the glass, the bayou moved in the dark. The lights from the far bank made long broken lines across the water. It was the kind of view people paid a great deal to look at. Tonight neither of them was looking at it. He told you, she said. Some of it. You told me more. She nodded slowly. Processing. Raymond left, she said. 20 minutes ago. And Damon. At the railing. He's still there. Or he was. Delvon looked at his hands on the table. He knows what's coming. She turned the champagne glass once. Just turned it. Didn't drink. I've been sitting here, she said, trying to figure out what the last 5 years were. What do you mean? I mean, she stopped. Started differently. I made a decision. I thought it was based on facts. It wasn't, so what was it based on? She looked at him. What were the last 5 years based on if the foundation was wrong from the start? He thought about that. Took it seriously the way he took all serious things. Fear, he said. You were afraid, that's real. What someone handed you to be afraid of wasn't real. But the fear was. She looked at him for a long moment. You're being very generous. I'm being accurate. Delvon. Her voice dropped. I left you. Yes. I left you in the worst year of your life. Yes. And you're sitting here being accurate, he said again. Not generous. Accurate. You were scared and someone gave you a map that was drawn wrong. That doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. He paused. And it makes Raymond Cross a man who will spend the next several years explaining himself to federal investigators, which is its own kind of justice. She made a sound that might have been a laugh in different circumstances. You always did that, she said. Did what? Stayed calm when I needed someone to be upset. Would it have helped if I was upset? No, she admitted. But it would have felt more fair. He looked at her. Life's not interested in fair. No, she said. It really isn't. Outside, someone walked past the glass wall, one of Damon's associates, moving with the focused energy of a man whose evening had changed direction. They both watched him pass without commenting. What happens now? She asked. For which part? For you. He reached into his jacket pocket, touched the envelope, didn't take it out. I have a letter to read, he said, and a Cadillac to finish. And Monday morning there are 6 people who need to be in the shop by 7. She watched him. That's it, she said. That's enough. She looked at her champagne again. Untouched. Probably warm by now. I need to go talk to Damon, she said. Not a question. Yes, he said. You do. She stood, smoothed the front of her dress. The earrings caught the light as she moved gold, swinging gently, catching everything. She looked at him one more time. Thank you, she said, for coming. You wrote my name yourself, he said. How could I not? She left. He sat at the small table by the glass wall for a few minutes after she was gone. Alone, which was fine. He was comfortable alone in a way that had been hard-won and now felt like a permanent feature of who he was. He looked out at the bayou, thought about his father's shop on Blodgett, the way it smelled in summer motor oil and concrete, and the particular heat of a Houston July that settled into every surface and stayed there. He thought about sitting on an overturned milk crate at age 11, watching Robert Hayes replace a transmission and asking questions that his father answered in full, every time. No impatience, no dismissal, just his father's hands moving and his father's voice explaining, and Delvon storing the information away in some part of himself that still held it. He thought about the F-100 in the parking lot, waiting, patient the way old things were patient when they'd been maintained right. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, put his hand in the inside pocket where the envelope was. Not yet. He walked back out into the main garden. The party had not ended, but it had transformed. The music was still playing, but fewer people were listening. Small groups had formed the tight clusters of people processing something together, heads close, voices low. The waitstaff moved through with practiced invisibility. The string quartet kept playing because no one had told them to stop, and they were professional enough not to make assumptions. Everett Brooks was standing near the fountain, alone, looking at the water the way people his age look at water, sometimes not seeing it specifically, just resting their eyes on something that moves. Delvon came and stood beside him. She went to find Damon, Delvon said. I saw. They stood in silence for a moment. She's going to end it, Everett said, not a question. Yes. How do you feel about that? Delvon considered. I feel like it's her decision, which it is, and it always was. Everett nodded slowly. Celeste would have liked you even more after tonight. She liked me plenty. She more than liked you. Everett looked at him sideways. She said once that you were the kind of man who made her believe the next generation wasn't a lost cause. Those were her exact words. Delvon felt something shift in his chest. Small, real. She say that often? Often enough that I wrote it down. Everett paused. She liked to say the thing once and then never repeat it. Said repetition cheapened things. That sounds like her. It was absolutely her, Everett smiled. Small and real and a little sad, the way smiles about people who are gone are always a little sad. She used to inventory everything too. Take stock, make lists. She always said the only way to know what you have is to name it. Delvon put his hand on the stone railing. She told me to open the letter when I knew it was time, he said. Yes. How did she know I'd know? Everett considered this seriously. Because she said you were the kind of man who pays attention. Not to appearances, to the actual thing. He paused. She said you'd spent your whole career learning to tell the difference between what something looked like and what it was, and she trusted that. The fountain ran. The lights swayed slightly in the evening breeze off the bayou. Open it now if you want, Everett said. Or take it home. She didn't specify. I'll take it home, Delvon said. Everett nodded. Like that was exactly what he'd expected. Across the garden, near the glass wall of the inner room, something was happening. Not loud. Nothing loud. But visible. Simone was standing at a table. Damon was standing 2 feet from her. They were both very still. The kind of stillness that happens when two people have just said the thing that cannot be unsaid and are waiting for the air to settle around it. No one else seemed to have noticed yet. Then Simone's hand moved, slowly, to the ring on her left hand. She held it there for a moment. Then she slipped it off, set it on the table between them. Damon looked at it. He didn't reach for it. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Simone. Something passed between them that was too private to read from this distance. And then he nodded. Once. With the particular quality of a man accepting something he'd known was coming. Simone picked up her glass, walked toward the far side of the room, slowly, with her back straight, and her head up, and the gold earrings catching every available light. She did not look shattered. She looked like a woman who had made a decision and was walking into the space that decision had opened. Everett said very quietly, There she goes. Yes, Delvon said. You had nothing to do with that. No, he agreed. That was entirely her. Everett looked at him. How does it feel to watch it? Delvon thought about it honestly. Like watching someone fix something they should have fixed a while ago, he said. Sad that it took so long. Glad it's getting done. Everett was quiet. Not what most men would say, he finally offered. I'm not most men. No, Everett said. You're really not. They stood by the fountain until the lights on the far bank of the bayou started blinking on one by one as the evening turned into something later. Jordan appeared. She had her portfolio under her arm and her keys in her hand and the expression of a woman who had assessed the room and determined that the useful part of the evening was over. Ready? She said. Delvon looked at Everett. Everett extended his hand. My number is on the envelope, he said. Call me when you've read it. Or don't, I can wait. But call me eventually. Delvon shook his hand, held it for a beat. Thank you, he said. For finding me. Thanks, Celeste, Everett said. She's the one who knew you were worth finding. He walked away with the ease of a man who had done the thing he came to do and was at peace with the evening. Delvon and Jordan walked toward the exit. They passed the service entrance table. Still there. Still small. The candle had given out entirely. He looked at it as he walked past and felt something that was close to affection for it. Another thing that had done its best in insufficient conditions. At the entrance, the valets were managing the exodus. Cars pulling up, doors opening, people flowing out and into the night. The F-100 came around the corner looking exactly as it always looked. Like itself. Unapologetically. The valet handed him the key. The door, the young man said. I figured it out. Good, Delvon said. Means you paid attention. Yes, sir. Jordan's Porsche was already at the curb. She stood beside it with the door open. Looked at him. Then at the truck. Then back at him with the expression she saved for situations she'd predicted accurately and wasn't proud of being right about. You're driving the truck, she said. I'm driving the truck. Delvon. That truck, Jordan. It made a sound on the way here that I heard from 2 parking lots over. It does that. That's not a normal sound for a vehicle to make. It runs fine. It runs like a man arguing with a doctor about whether he needs to see a doctor. He almost laughed. Actually, almost. Take the Porsche, she said. I'll get an Uber. You will not get an Uber. Then I'll take the truck and you take the Jordan. He stopped. Looked at her. I drove here in that truck. I'm driving home in that truck. That's how this works. She looked at him with the expression of a woman who had argued with military brass and survived, and was nonetheless losing this argument. I genuinely do not understand you, she said. Yes, you do. She paused. Yeah, she said, I really do. She got in the Porsche, rolled down the window. Call me when you're home. I'm 42 years old. Call me when you're home. He got in the F-100. The seat was exactly where he'd left it. The steering wheel felt exactly the way it always felt. The cab smelled like old upholstery, and the faint ghost of motor oil that never fully left him no matter how long he'd been away from the shop. He started the engine. It turned over with its usual sound. Not smooth, not quiet, completely itself. He pulled out of the estate drive, past the remaining cars, past the valets, past the private road and out onto the street where everything was ordinary again. The drive home took 38 minutes. He took Alameda instead of 288. Slower but more itself, the road running through the parts of the city that were still the city, still recognizable, still carrying the particular character of a place that had been black and working and proud for longer than most of the buildings that were replacing it. He drove past a church he'd been inside once, 30 years ago, for a funeral, past a barber shop that had been there his whole life and was still there, the sign, past a block where he knew a woman in her 80s who kept a garden that people photographed from their cars without asking permission, and the garden was lit from below at night, and it was beautiful, and he slowed down to look at it. Still there, he got home, parked, climbed the stairs to his apartment. It was quiet inside, the kind of quiet he'd made his peace with. He took off his jacket, hung it on the hook by the door, put his keys on the counter. Then he took the envelope from the inside pocket and set it on the kitchen table. He made coffee. Real coffee, not the pod kind, the kind his mother made, the kind that took time. While it brewed, he stood at the kitchen window and looked out at Emancipation Avenue below. Quiet at this hour. A car passing. A dog somewhere. The particular sound of the city resting. He poured his coffee, sat down at the table, picked up the envelope. Celeste Brooks had small handwriting, neat and economical. The writing of a woman who had learned early that words had weight and didn't need to be made larger to matter. His name on the front. No address, just his name. He opened it carefully. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, no date at the top. He read it, slowly, the way he read things that mattered, not rushing toward the end, letting each line settle before moving to the next. She began with the collection, 41 vehicles. She described each one briefly, not their specifications, their histories, where each had come from, who had owned them first, what they had witnessed. She had learned these histories over decades, and she wrote them in the compressed, specific way of someone who had thought a great deal about what to include and what to leave out. 12 of them were to be restored. He would know which 12. She was confident of that. The remaining 29 were to remain as they were, maintained and housed and documented. A living record, not a museum. She was very clear on the distinction. Not a museum, a record. All of it, the facility, the collection, the financial endowment for ongoing maintenance, was to be transferred to Hayes Restoration Works. Formally, legally, with Everett handling the details. He read that twice. Then he kept reading. The second page was different. It was shorter, and it was not about the cars. She wrote, "I am not giving you these things because you became successful. I am giving them to you because of something I saw on a Tuesday afternoon when I was watching you work. There was a woman who brought in a car she couldn't quite afford to repair the way it needed. You didn't tell her that. You repaired it the way it needed, and you handed her a bill for half of what it cost you, and you said the rest whenever she had it. She never came back. I don't think she ever had it. And you never mentioned it again. That is the kind of man I was looking for. Not because generosity is sentimental. Because generosity of that kind, practical, quiet, asking nothing in return, is the rarest thing I know." He put the letter down, picked up his coffee. Cold already. He sat with it. Outside, Emancipation Avenue was doing what it always did. Being itself. Moving at its own pace. Carrying its own history in the names of its streets, and the shapes of its buildings, and the specific quality of its light at this hour. He thought about the woman. With the car, he'd almost forgotten about her. She'd had an Oldsmobile Cutlass, 1988, and she'd driven it into the shop on a Monday, and she'd tried not to look worried when he told her what it needed. He'd seen the math happening on her face. He'd done the math himself and decided quietly that his version was the one he'd hand her. He hadn't known Celeste was watching. He hadn't known anyone was watching. Which was, He understood now, the entire point. He refolded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope and set it beside his coffee cup. Then he picked up his phone and called Everett. It rang twice. "I figured you'd call tonight," Everett said. "You figured right." A pause. "Well?" "I read it." "And?" Delvon looked at the envelope, at the coffee, at the window and the street below. "She was very specific," he said. "She was always very specific. About the 12 that need restoration. About the others." "Yes. About what it's not supposed to be, the museum thing." Everett almost sounded amused. "She felt strongly about that. A record," Delvon said. "Not a museum. There's a difference," she always said. "A museum is for looking at. A record is for understanding." Delvon thought about that. About the distinction. About the specific way Celeste had of naming things accurately. "I'll do it," he said. "I know. The legal transfer. I'll have the documents to your office by end of next week. Jordan can handle the review. Jordan will have notes, I expect nothing less." Everett paused. "Delvon. Yeah, she was right about you." He didn't answer that. Didn't know how to answer it without it sounding like something it wasn't. "Good night, Everett," he said. "Good night." He hung up, sat in his kitchen for another hour, not thinking about anything specific, just sitting, drinking his cold coffee, watching the street below. At some point he fell asleep in the chair. He woke up when the light was different. Early, before sunrise. The particular blue-gray light of a Houston morning that hadn't decided yet what it was going to be. He got up, made fresh coffee this time, stood at the window while it brewed. Below on Emancipation, a truck went past. Moving van. The kind people hired when they were going somewhere. He watched it until it turned the corner and was gone. He thought about Simone. Not with longing. Not with bitterness. Just thought about her the way you think about people who have been part of you as a fact, as a real thing that happened and shaped the person you became. She had been his wife for 12 years, and she had left him when he needed her most, and she had done it based on information that was deliberately false, and she had found the truth 3 weeks ago and driven herself to the edge of a different life, and then stood at the window of a party and said, "I needed a witness." He had been her witness. That was what she needed. Not rescue, not reunion, a witness. He could do that. He had done that. She had her own path from here, as she should. He thought about Raymond Cross. That particular anger, the one he'd carried for 6 months, since Jordan had put the folder on his desk, had done something tonight, had not gone away. That wasn't how anger worked. But it had changed shape, had become less hot, more like a piece of metal that has cooled and hardened into something useful. Raymond would account for himself, not to Delvon, to the people whose job it was to hold men like Raymond accountable. Delvon's job was not to be the instrument of that accounting. His job was the shop, the collection, the 12 cars that needed restoration, the work. He thought about Everett's face when he'd handed over the envelope, the particular quality of that moment, 2 men standing at a party, one of them completing the last instruction of someone they'd both cared about, the relief in it, and the grief in it, and the way those 2 things had occupied the same moment without contradiction. He thought about Celeste, about the way she'd sat in his waiting chair for 3 hours reading a book, about the way she'd asked where the cars came from, not what they were worth, about the way she'd said in the hospital that she needed him to talk to her brother when the time came. The patience of that, knowing she was dying and still planning that carefully, still that exact. He thought about the woman with the Oldsmobile Cutlass. He hoped she was doing all right. Wherever she was, he poured his coffee, went to the table, sat down, opened his laptop, pulled up the file for the Hayes Restoration Works second quarter projections. Jordan had flagged 3 items that needed his review before Monday morning. He read through them, made notes, sent her a message with his comments. She responded in 11 minutes. It was 5:23 in the morning. He typed, "Why are you awake?" She typed back, "Why are you awake?" He typed, "Working." She typed, "Same. Also, I need to tell you something." He typed, "What?" She typed, "I pulled Raymond Cross's full file last night. After the party. I've been at it since midnight." He typed, "Jordan." She typed, "Let me finish. There are 6 other businesses, all black-owned, all in Houston, all targeted the same way you were. false assessments, bank pressure, forced sales. He used different names, different cutouts, but the pattern is identical. He looked at that. 6 others. 6 other people who had been told their life's work was worth nothing and had believed it because the document looked real and the fear was real and no one had told them the document was lying. He typed, "Send me everything." She typed, "Already did. Check your email." He typed, "This is going to be a long process." She typed, "Yes." He typed, "We're going to need to talk to an attorney." She typed, "I have 3 names. I'll set meetings for next week." He looked at his phone, at her name on the screen. At the time 5:31 in the morning, and thought about the fact that she'd been up all night pulling files because she'd found a thread and she did not leave threads unpulled. He typed, "Go home and sleep." She typed, "After I finish this section." He typed, "Jordan." She typed, "After I finish this section." He put his phone down, opened his email, found her file, started reading. It was thorough. It was meticulous. It was the work of someone who understood that the difference between a grievance and a case was documentation. He read for 2 hours. When he finished, it was full morning. Light coming through the windows properly now. The street below was waking up. He could hear it, the specific sounds of a neighborhood transitioning from night to day, from still to moving. He closed the laptop, went and got his jacket, put it on, checked the inside pocket out of habit. The envelope was still there. He took it out, set it on the table. He'd bring it to the shop, put it somewhere safe. The kind of document that deserved better than an apartment drawer. He picked up his keys, went downstairs, got in the F-100. The engine turned over with its usual sound, neither smooth nor troubled, just itself. He drove to the shop, unlocked the door, turned on the lights. The Cadillac DeVille was in the center bay, hood up, engine waiting. He'd been 6 days into the job when the envelope arrived and changed the shape of the week. Now it was Sunday morning and the shop was quiet, and the work was there. He put on his gloves, picked up exactly where he'd left off, because that was the thing. You put the work down when you had to, and then you came back to it, and it was still there, still needing the same things it had always needed. Honest assessment, patient hands, the willingness to do the next right step without knowing yet how many steps there were. He worked for 2 hours before he heard a car in the lot. Not Jordan's Porsche, different engine. He placed it without looking up. Older vehicle, well maintained, the kind of sound that only came from years of consistent care. He heard the shop door open. He didn't stop working. Footsteps, unhurried. The sound of someone who knew where they were going. Everett Brooks appeared at the edge of the bay. He was in different clothes than the evening before. Weekend clothes. Still precise. The way everything about him was precise, but relaxed. He had 2 cups of coffee from somewhere, the kind in actual paper cups with actual lids. He set one on the edge of the workbench. "I was in the neighborhood," he said. "Nobody's in the neighborhood at 7 on a Sunday," Delvon said. "I was," Everett said simply. He looked at the DeVille. Walked around it slowly, the way people who understood cars walked around cars. Not performing assessment. Actually looking. 1967, he said. 68. Late production run. Your father's. Delvon looked up. "I mentioned that?" Celeste mentioned it. "She said you were restoring your father's car and that when it was done you were going to drive it once and then keep it the way it was." He went back to work. "That's not accurate," he said. "Oh, when it's done I'm going to drive it. Not once. When I want to." He turned a fitting carefully. It was meant to be driven. It'd be a waste not to. Everett smiled. The real one. The small one that was worth more than a bigger version would have been. She also said you'd say something like that. Delvon kept working. The morning light came through the shop windows and fell across the engine in the specific way that Sunday morning light falls, generous, unhurried, not making any demands on the day. Everett sat on the old stool in the corner, the same corner where his father used to sit, though Everett didn't know that, and drank his coffee and watched, and didn't say anything, which was in its way, everything. 6 months is a long time, and no time at all. Delvon had learned that in the year after his father died, how a month could feel like a decade and a decade could collapse into an afternoon. How time stopped being linear when you were in the middle of building something real. How the days blurred together, Not because they were empty, but because they were full. So full that looking back on them was like looking at a river from a bridge. You could see it moving, but you couldn't pick out one single drop. 6 months after the party at the estate on Memorial Drive, Delvon Hayes stood in front of a building on Dowling Street in 3rd Ward and looked at the sign above the door. New sign. He'd painted it himself. Again. Second time. Same mistake as before with the first shop: wrong paint, first coat. Right paint, second coat. He'd stood back and looked at it for a long time before going inside. Hayes Restoration Works. Same name, different building. This one was the one Raymond Cross had wanted. The one that sat on the land that Raymond had decided was more valuable without Delvon on it. The one that Delvon had held onto through the worst year of his financial life, not because he knew he'd win, but because it was his, and he'd built it, and there was no version of himself that walked it away from something he'd built with his own hands. He owned it now. Fully. Not the lease he'd had before. The deed. His name on it. Robert Jerome Hayes. He'd added his father's name to the LLC when he filed the paperwork. Nobody had asked why. Jordan had just typed it in without comment and then said, "That's good." And he'd said, "Yeah." And that had been all of it. The building was bigger than the old shop on Elgin. Ground floor was the workshop, 6 bays. Proper ventilation, lifts that worked every time. Tools that were organized the way tools should be organized. Which is to say the way his father had taught him, which is to say by use, frequency, and weight. Everything had a place. Everything was in its place. Jordan had spent 4 days designing the organizational system and had presented it to him on a whiteboard with such thoroughness that he'd briefly wondered if she'd missed her calling in industrial engineering. He'd said as much. She'd said, "I know. Don't tell anyone." The second floor was divided. Front half was the office, his desk, Jordan's desk, a conference table that could seat 8 and usually had 6 people around it on any given Tuesday. Back half was something new, something that hadn't existed in the old shop, something that he'd been thinking about for a long time, without knowing what to call it until he was filling out the building permit and had to write something down. He'd written apprenticeship program, because that was what it was. 8 spots. First cohort had started 11 weeks ago. 8 people, all from 3rd Ward or 5th Ward, all between 19 and 24, all of them coming from places and situations that had more in common with where Delvon had started than where he was now, which was precisely the point. He hadn't gone looking for candidates with the right credentials. He'd gone looking for candidates with the right hands. People who had grown up fixing things because fixing things was how you survived. People who understood that mechanical aptitude wasn't a hobby, it was a language, a way of understanding the world. He'd found them through Ebenezer AME, through the Career Center at Texas Southern, through a man named Garfield who ran a community center on Alabama Street and knew every young person in a 4-block radius, through a woman named Dottie who had worked the front desk at the neighborhood rec center for 22 years and knew, without consulting any list, exactly who needed what. 8 people. He'd interviewed all of them himself, sat across from each one in the conference room upstairs and asked the same 2 questions. What's the last thing you fixed? And why did you bother? The answers to the first question ranged from a refrigerator compressor to a cracked phone screen to a 1994 Chevy Blazer with a blown head gasket that the candidate had rebuilt using YouTube, a borrowed socket set, and 3 weeks of afternoons. The answers to the second question were the ones he listened to. Some people said because it was cheaper than replacing it, which was honest and he respected it. Some people said because they didn't like leaving things broken, which was better. One young woman, Tanya, 21, from the 5th Ward, who had been fixing her grandmother's appliances since she was 14, said, "Because everything that gets thrown away used to be somebody's important thing. And I don't like the idea of important things getting thrown away just because nobody took the time." He'd hired all 8, but he'd thought about Tanya's answer for a week. The arrangement was this. The apprentices came in at 7, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The other mornings they had coursework. Delvon had worked with Everett to connect the program to a technical certification through Texas Southern. Not a degree, not a 2-year program, but a certificate, something they could hold, Something that had weight on paper the way weight on paper mattered in a world that required proof of what you knew. They worked in the shop under supervision. Real work, not practice work. The vehicles that came through Hayes Restoration were client vehicles, real clients, real expectations, real consequences if something was done wrong, which meant the apprentices were learning in conditions that mattered. Delvon had been very clear about this from the beginning. He'd stood in front of all 8 of them on the first morning and said, "You will make mistakes in here. That's expected. What's not acceptable is making the same mistake twice without understanding why you made it the first time." He'd paused. "If you break something, tell me immediately. We fix it together. If you hide it, you're done. Not because I'm angry, because the habit of hiding problems is more dangerous in this work than the problem itself." 8 faces. 8 different expressions of taking that seriously. He'd gone back to the shop. They'd started working. The months had a shape to them. October brought the official legal transfer of Celeste's collection 41 vehicles, the facility in Katy, the endowment that Everett had spent 6 months organizing with a patience and thoroughness that would have made Celeste proud, and probably had, wherever she was. Jordan spent 12 days reviewing the documents. She had 47 notes. Everett's attorney addressed all 47 without complaint and came back with a revised version. Jordan had 3 more notes on the revised version. Everett had called Delvon to say, "Your assistant is terrifying." Delvon had said, "Yes. Is she always like this? This is her being agreeable." A pause on Everett's end. "Celeste would have loved her," he said finally. "I know," Delvon said. "Don't tell her that. Her head is the right size right now, and I need it to stay that way." The collection had its own rhythm. Delvon drove out to Katy twice a week, sometimes 3 times, and spent time with each vehicle. Not always working. Sometimes just looking. Sometimes taking notes. He was building the record Celeste had described. Not a museum catalog. A record. The history of each vehicle. Who made it, who bought it first, where it went, what it witnessed, how it ended up in the care of the Brooks family, what condition it was in when it arrived, what it needed. The 12 that needed restoration he was approaching one at a time. Not rushing. Each one deserved its own attention, its own process, its own timeline. He'd started with a 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air that had belonged to Celeste's grandfather, the first car he'd ever bought, the one that had started everything. It was in the worst condition of the 12, which was exactly why he'd started with it. Because the hardest things deserved the most patience. He'd brought 2 of the apprentices in on the Bel Air, Tanya and a young man named Darius, 22, from 3rd Ward, who had been rebuilding small engines since he was 16 and had hands that already knew things that most people's hands never learned. He'd explained what they were doing and why, the history of the car, what Celeste's grandfather had been when he bought it, what it meant that it had survived this long. Tanya had run her hand along the fender very gently, the way you touched something you were trying to understand. "It's like meeting someone's family," she'd said. He'd looked at her. "Yeah," he'd said. "Exactly like that." November brought something he hadn't expected. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Jordan put her head in the workshop and said, "Houston Chronicle. They want to do a piece." He kept working. "About the program," she added. He kept working. "Delvon. Tell them I'm not interested in a profile. They're not doing a profile. They're doing a piece about what happened with Raymond Cross. The other 6 businesses." She paused. "They've been investigating for 3 months. He stopped. Looked at her. Because the 6 other businesses, the ones Jordan had found in the files she'd pulled the night of the party, had become something larger than he'd anticipated. He'd passed Jordan's documentation to an attorney named Renata Okafor, who had been doing business fraud work in Houston for 18 years, and who had looked at Jordan's files with the expression of someone recognizing a pattern they'd been waiting to see documented. "This is not new behavior," Renata had said on their first meeting. "This has been happening in communities like yours for 40 years. The documentation has been the problem. Nobody's ever had enough of it in one place." "We have it now," Jordan had said. Renata had looked at Jordan for a long moment. "You pulled all of this in one night," she'd said. "I had context," Jordan said. "I knew what I was looking for. I need you to walk me through every source." I have a presentation prepared. Another long moment. Of course you do, Renata had said. The case had moved faster than Delvon expected. Raymond Cross had retained 2 attorneys and a PR firm, which meant he had taken it seriously from the beginning, which meant he'd known this was coming. The investigation had expanded beyond Cross himself. There were other names, other transactions, a web that Renata described as extensive and deliberately obscured. These things take time, Renata had told him in October, but they move. We're moving. The Chronicle piece was about the pattern, about what Raymond had done and how he'd done it, and how many times he'd done it. They wanted Delvon's account, not a profile, a piece of a larger story. He thought about it for 2 days. Then he called the reporter back. He told her he would talk to her once, for an hour, on record, and that he would answer questions about the facts of what happened to his business and his marriage. He would not speculate. He would not editorialize. He would tell her what he knew and what he could document. She agreed. The interview happened in the conference room. Jordan sat in, said nothing, watched everything. The reporter, a woman named Adrian, mid-40s, with the quiet attentiveness of someone who had done this long enough to know that the best thing she could do was listen, ask her questions and wrote down the answers, and asked follow-up questions that were precise and intelligent. She'd done her research. She knew the timeline. She wasn't looking for drama. She was looking for truth. He gave her truth. When it was done, she shook his hand and said, "Thank you for this." He said, "Make sure the other 6 get the same space." She said, "They will. That's the piece." He said, "Then I'm glad I talked to you." The story ran in November, 2 days before Thanksgiving. He read it on his phone in the shop, early morning, before anyone else was in. Read it straight through. She'd done what she said she'd do, told the full story, gave equal space to all 7 business owners, named Cross by name with specific documented instances, and wrote about the pattern with the clarity and anger of someone who understood what the pattern meant. He put his phone down, went back to work. That afternoon his mother called. "I read the article," Eleanor said. "I know. You didn't tell me they were interviewing you. I didn't want you to worry. I worry anyway. You should tell me things so I can worry about the accurate version." He almost smiled. "Fair." A pause. "You did the right thing," she said. Quiet. The voice she used for things she meant completely. "I don't know about that. I just told the truth. Delvon." Her voice had that quality. It sometimes had the one that meant she was about to say the thing she'd been carrying for a while. Telling the truth when you don't have to. When you could have just moved forward and let it go. That's not small. He didn't answer. "Your father would have done the same thing," she said. He looked at the shop, at the Cadillac in the center bay, further along now, at the tools on the walls, at the red metal toolbox in the back corner that had his father's initials on a piece of masking tape that had been there so long it was more part of the box than the box was. "Yeah," he said. He would have. December arrived with a cold front that surprised Houston the way cold fronts always surprised Houston, as if the city had forgotten every previous winter and was encountering cold for the first time. Delvon wore the same jacket he always wore. Jordan wore a coat that looked like it had been designed for considerably worse conditions than Texas in December, which was very Jordan. The apprentices adapted. Tanya brought coffee for the whole group on cold mornings, without being asked the good coffee, from a place on Alameda, which cost more than the shop's instant, and which everyone pretended not to notice was significantly better. Darius started staying late, not because he had to, because he was working on something on his own time. He'd found a motorcycle frame in the back of the lot when they'd moved into the building, left there by a previous tenant, rusted and stripped, but structurally sound. He hadn't asked permission to work on it. He'd just started. Delvon had noticed it after the second week. He hadn't said anything, because watching someone fix something they found on their own, without being asked, without guidance, just because the thing existed and was broken, and they had the hands to do something about it, that was exactly what this was supposed to look like. He waited. Week 4, Darius came to him. "There's a frame in the back lot," he said. "I know," Delvon said. "I've been working on it." "I know that, too." A pause. Darius processing. "Is that okay?" Delvon looked at him. 22 years old. Hands already calloused from work that had nothing to do with this shop. Work he'd done before anyone ever paid him for it. Eyes that were careful and proud and a little uncertain all at once. "What do you need to finish it?" Delvon asked. The uncertainty shifted into something else. "Engine," Darius said. "And probably about 40 hours. Engine we can find. 40 hours you've already got." Delvon went back to what he was working on. "Bring me the frame assessment when you've written it up." A pause. "Written it up?" Darius said. "Condition of each component. What's salvageable? What needs replacing in writing?" Delvon looked at him. "You want to do the work, you document the work. Every step. That's how it's done." Darius nodded. Came back 2 days later with 4 pages of handwritten notes. The most thorough assessment Delvon had seen a first-year apprentice produce. He read it without expression. Handed it back. "There's a note missing," he said. "Where?" "The fork tubes. You assessed the lower legs but not the upper. Look again." Darius took the notes. Went back to the lot. Came back an hour later. Added 2 paragraphs. Delvon read them. Nodded. "Now we can start," he said. January. The first cohort was 3 months in. The work had found its rhythm. Not easy, it was never easy. Real work never was, but honest. The kind of rhythm that came from showing up consistently and doing the next right thing, and not expecting the thing after that to come faster than it was ready to come. Renata Okafor called on a Thursday morning. Jordan put her on speaker in the conference room. "Raymond Cross's attorneys have been in contact," Renata said. "There's preliminary discussion of a settlement structure." Delvon looked at Jordan. Jordan looked at the phone. "What kind of structure?" Jordan asked. "Financial restitution to the 7 business owners. Documentation of the methodology used." And Renata paused in the way of attorneys who are about to say the significant thing. A formal acknowledgement of pattern. Meaning they'd have to put in writing that this was not an isolated incident. Silence in the room. That last part was the part that mattered. Financial restitution was money. Acknowledgement of pattern was record. It was the difference between a thing being corrected and a thing being documented as real. "That's what we want," Delvon said. "I know," Renata said. "Which is why I'm calling to tell you it may be possible." "Maybe," Jordan said. "These things are never certain until they are." But the Chronicle piece changed the environment. When things are in print, in a reputable publication, with documentation, the calculus changes for the other side. Delvon thought about Adrian, about the interview, about what she'd said when she left. Make sure the other 6 get the same space. She had. "Keep going," he said. "Whatever you need from us, Jordan has it." Jordan nodded, writing something down. "One more thing," Renata said. "The acknowledgement of pattern, if this goes through, it creates a record that can be referenced by other people, in other cases, potentially in other cities." Delvon was quiet. "That's the point," he said. "I know," Renata said. "I wanted you to know I know." February. Simone published her piece in the Chronicle on a Thursday. Not the same reporter as the Raymond Cross story. Her own byline, her own account, written and reported herself. She'd gone back to writing. She'd told him in a brief email in December. Not teaching, not PR, but journalism. Accountability journalism specifically. She'd said it mattered more to her than anything she'd done in years. He'd read the email twice and written back, "That sounds right for you." She'd written back, "It does." That was the whole correspondence. Her piece ran without warning to him. He hadn't known it was coming. He found it Thursday morning the same way he'd found the Cross story. On his phone. In the shop. Before anyone else was in. She wrote about herself. About being a woman who had believed she was making a rational decision and had not known the decision was built on sand. About fear and ambition and the particular way those 2 things could combine in a person's mind to produce something that looked like logic but wasn't. About what she'd lost. About what she'd done wrong. She did not name Delvon. She didn't need to. But she said this: "There was a man who knew the truth before I did. He waited for me to find it myself. Not to punish me. Not because he was patient in some saintly way that real people can't sustain. But because he understood that truth delivered from the outside is information. Truth you find yourself is a reckoning. And a reckoning is the only thing that actually changes anything." He put his phone down. Sat with that for a while, then got up. Went to work. He texted her one line, "Good piece." She texted back 3 words, "Thank you." Finally, March arrived and the F-100 arrived at the center of everything. Not literally, but it had been sitting in his mind for months, the question of what to do with it. The truck was 38 years old. It had been maintained, which meant it ran, which meant it did what vehicles were supposed to do. But it was the kind of vehicle that people looked at and saw limitation. People had been looking at it that way for years. Delvon had let them look, but the apprentices had started looking at it differently. Tanya had asked about it in the second week. Just asked. What year? What engine? What the story was. He'd told her without making anything of it. She'd nodded, filed it away, gone back to work. Darius had spent 10 minutes one afternoon just walking around it in the parking lot, not touching, just looking. The way you looked at something when you were trying to understand it structurally. Two of the others had asked if it ran. He'd said yes. They'd asked if they could hear it. He'd started it. They'd listened. Their faces had done the thing faces did when they heard a sound that had history in it. It was Tanya who said it out loud. One morning in February, they were finishing a session and he was writing notes on what they'd covered, and she said, without looking up from cleaning her tools, the F-100 should be the final project. He looked at her. What do you mean? I mean for the cohort. End of the program, the restoration. All of us. That's the exam. He looked at her for a long time. She looked back, steady, the way she always was, 21 years old, and already in possession of the particular steadiness of someone who had been responsible for things earlier than was fair and had organized herself around it. That's a significant project, he said. Yes, she said. You'd need to do it right. I know that. Every component assessed. Every decision documented. I know, no shortcuts, Mr. Hayes. She looked at him with the patience of a young woman who had answered this question before, in different forms from different people. I don't take shortcuts. He almost smiled. No, he said. You don't. So that was how it became official. The F-100 restoration as the cohort's final project. He'd announced it the next Monday. 8 people in the shop, standing around the truck like it was an altar, which it sort of was. He'd explained the history. Not the sentimental version, the actual version. What the truck was. When he'd bought it, what it had cost. Where it had been. What it meant to him. Not because of sentiment, but because it was the first thing he'd owned that was entirely his. Bought with money he'd earned himself, maintained by his own hands, and never once given up on, even when it would have been easier and cheaper and more practical to let it go. 8 faces listening. And then he said, You're going to restore it, all of you, together. Every decision is a group decision. Every piece of work is documented. At the end, the person who demonstrates the most complete understanding of the whole project, not just their piece, the whole will be the one who drives it home. Silence. Then Darius, drives it where? Home, Delvon said. You're home. For one night. More silence. Then Tanya. And then what? And then it comes back here, he said. Because it belongs here. The project took 6 weeks. Not because the work required 6 weeks necessarily, but because doing it right required 6 weeks. Because every decision was discussed. Because every piece was assessed before it was touched and documented, before it was replaced and explained before it was installed. Because 8 people with different knowledge and different instincts and different strengths had to find the way to make their work into one coherent thing, instead of 8 separate good enough things. It was harder than any single person working alone. It was better. Delvon watched from the edge more than he intervened, answering questions, but asked, redirecting when necessary. But mostly watching the thing he'd hoped for happen in real time. 8 people who had started as individuals becoming, week by week, something that functioned like a team. Not because he'd told them to, because the work required it. The truck emerged from the process the way things emerge from real restoration. Not transformed into something it wasn't. Returned to what it had always been, underneath the surface damage. The paint was the original color. He'd found the factory code in a document from when he'd bought the truck, and Jordan had sourced the paint from a supplier in Dallas. Sky blue. The exact shade. Not brighter, not deeper. Exactly what it had been when it rolled off the line. The engine ran the way an engine should run when someone has paid attention to every part of it. The doors opened without needing to be lifted. All of them. He stood in front of it on the morning they finished, all 8 apprentices standing around him. Jordan in the doorway, Everett, who had somehow known to come that morning, standing to one side with a coffee he'd brought himself and hadn't offered to share with anyone because he'd understood this was not a moment for coffee. Delvon walked around the truck once, slowly. No performance, just looking. The way he always looked at finished work with attention and honesty, and the willingness to see what wasn't right alongside what was. He came back to the front. "Tanya," he said. She straightened. She'd known. He thought she'd probably known for a week. "Yes, sir. Tell me why the decision on the steering column." And she did. Clearly. Completely. Not just what they'd done, but why. What the alternatives were. Why they'd chosen this approach. What the trade-offs were. What she would do differently if she did it again. He listened to every word. When she was done, he nodded. "Keys are on the bench," he said. She went to the bench, picked them up, held them in her hand for a moment like she was feeling their weight. Then she looked at him. "Tonight," she said. "Tonight," he said. "Bring it back by 7 tomorrow." "Yes, sir." And Tanya, she paused. "Drive it," he said. "Don't park it somewhere safe and not drive it. Drive it." She almost smiled. "Yes, sir." She got in. The engine started. The sound of it restored and right and completely itself filled the shop in a way that made everyone go quiet. She drove out of the bay, into the morning, the sky blue of the truck catching the March light as it turned onto Dowling and headed south. He watched it until he couldn't see it. Then he turned back to the shop. 7 people looking at him. "Monday," he said. "Second cohort starts. There's work to do before then." They went back to work. He went back to work. That evening he stayed late, which was usual. Jordan had gone home at 6 after leaving a stack of documents for his review and a note that said, "Second cohort intake paperwork, sign everything with an actual pen, not the electronic signature. I know you hate paper and I don't care." He signed everything with an actual pen. Then he sat at his desk for a while in the quiet of the building after everyone else was gone. The shop was still and the light was low, and everything had the quality of a place that was full of the day's work even when the day's workers had gone home. He thought about his father, about Robert Hayes in the shop on Blodgett, the specific image of him that Delvon returned to most often, not the funeral, not the hospital, not even the last conversation. Just Robert at the workbench, hands moving, voice steady, the afternoon light coming through the one window that faced west, the smell of the place. "You just worked," his father used to say, when Delvon was young and impatient and wanted to know when things would get easier, when things would add up, when all the work would become something. "You just worked," and the work was the thing. The work was always the thing. He looked at the Cadillac, almost done. Another week, maybe 2, then it would be finished and someone would come and collect it, and it would go back to its owner who would drive it the way it was meant to be driven, which was the point. Always the point. He thought about Celeste, about what she'd written, about the woman with the Oldsmobile Cutlass who had never come back. He still didn't know her name. He'd never asked. She'd paid what she could and said she'd come back for the rest, and he'd said all right and she'd left, and he'd never tracked her down or mentioned it again. He'd done that because it was the right thing, not because he'd been performing for anyone, not because he'd expected anything from it. Because a woman had needed her car repaired, and he'd repaired it, and the math of what she owed him was less important than the fact of what she needed. That was all. That was apparently enough. He turned off the desk lamp, got his jacket, walked through the shop past the Cadillac, past the empty bays, past the workbenches, with their organized tools and their specific places for every specific thing. He stopped at the back corner, his father's toolbox, red metal, dented at the corners. The piece of masking tape with R. Hayes written on it in his father's handwriting, still there after everything. He put his hand on it, didn't open it, didn't need to. He knew what was in it. He'd listed everything. Years ago. Put the list inside and closed it. He stood there for a moment. Then he took his hand away and walked to the door and turned off the lights and locked up. The street was quiet. March. The air doing the thing it did in Houston in March, not quite winter, not quite spring, something in between that had its own particular quality if you knew to look for it. He walked to the F-100, which was not there. Right. Tanya had it. He stood in the empty parking spot for a moment, which should have been strange coming out to where the truck always was and finding nothing there. But it wasn't strange, it was exactly right. He called Jordan. She answered on the second ring. I need a ride, he said. A pause. Are you telling me? She said that you are standing in a parking lot without your truck because you gave it to a 21-year-old for the night. Yes, and you need me to come get you. Yes. Silence. I'm on my way, she said, and hung up. He stood in the parking lot and waited. The street was quiet. A dog somewhere. Distant traffic from 288. The particular sound of the neighborhood at this hour, which was not silence but was close enough to silence, to do what silence did, make space for the thing you were actually thinking. He was thinking about Monday. Second cohort. 8 new people. 8 new pairs of hands that didn't yet know what they were capable of. 8 new stories that hadn't finished being written. He was thinking about the 12 cars in Katy, the Bel Air in progress, the 11 others waiting, the record he was building, the history he was documenting, the thing that Celeste had trusted him to make real. He was thinking about Renata Okafor and the settlement that was getting closer, about the pattern being acknowledged in writing, about what that acknowledgement would mean for the 6 other business owners, and for the people after them, and for the city that had let this happen for decades, because no one had assembled the documentation. Jordan's Porsche turned onto Dowling, pulled up beside him. She rolled down the window. Get in, she said. He got in, she pulled out, headed north on Dowling, which took them past the old shop on Elgin. The building was something else now, a laundromat. The sign changed, but the bones the same. And then through the part of Third Ward that was still itself, still carrying the weight of what it had always been. The streets named for the history they contained. He looked out the window. You're quiet, Jordan said. I'm always quiet. You're quieter than always quiet. He watched the neighborhood go past. The barber shop still open at 7:30. The church on the corner with the lit sign out front, Ebenezer AME. Sunday service 9 and 11, all are welcome. The garden on the block he always slowed down for, still there, lit from below. Beautiful in the way of things that were tended carefully over many years. Second cohort Monday, he said. I know. I did all the paperwork. 8 people. 8 people, she confirmed. 4 from Third Ward, 3 from Fifth Ward, 1 from Sunnyside. Ages? 19 to 26 this time. He nodded. They drove. Jordan, he said. Yeah. When you pulled those files the night of the party. The other 6 businesses. Yeah. You'd been planning to do that. A pause. She kept her eyes on the road. I'd been waiting for the right context, she said carefully. You knew if it came out at the party. I knew the Chronicle would be paying attention. I knew if it happened in a visible context, there'd be pressure to report on it. She paused, and I knew you wouldn't do it yourself. He looked at her. She kept her eyes on the road. That's my job, she said. Not to do what you tell me. To do what needs doing. He was quiet. You should have told me. You would have told me not to. Yes, and it needed to happen. Yes, he admitted. She pulled onto Emancipation, his block, pulled up in front of his building. He didn't get out immediately. Jordan, yeah, you've worked for me 3 years, 2 years and 9 months. In 3 months it'll be 3 years. Okay, at 3 years I'm offering you a partnership stake in the company. He looked at her. Not a title change, an actual stake. You'll need to talk to Renata about the structure. She stared straight ahead through the windshield. For a long moment she didn't say anything, which was unusual. Jordan Wade always had something to say. You don't have to do that, she said finally. I know. I'm not asking for it. I know that, too. Another silence. Okay, she said. Okay. I'm going to have a lot of notes on the structure, I assumed. Renata's going to earn her fee. She knows. He got out of the car, stood on the sidewalk. The evening was cool and still. Jordan rolled down the window. Delvon. He turned. The truck looks good, she said. What they did with it. It looks right. He looked at her. Yes, he said, it does. She rolled the window back up, pulled away. The Porsche's taillights went down Emancipation and turned the corner. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looked up at the building. His apartment on the 3rd floor, dark because he hadn't been home yet. The street around him quiet and real and entirely familiar. Third Ward. Where he was from. Where he'd stayed. Where he'd built the thing he'd built not in spite of the place, but because of it. Because of what the place had given him and taught him and asked him to be. He went upstairs. Made coffee. Let it get cold. Sat at the kitchen table where Celeste's letter had sat that first night. The letter was in his desk now. In the shop. In a folder in the top drawer where he kept the things that mattered enough to need a specific place. He thought about Monday. 8 new people. 8 new pairs of hands. He thought about Tanya driving the F100 right now, somewhere in the city. Taking it out. Driving it the way he'd told her to actually driving it. Not parking it somewhere safe and sitting with it, but moving through the city in it. Feeling what it felt like to sit behind the wheel of a thing you'd helped bring back from what it had been. He hoped she was on the highway. Moving fast. The window down. The engine doing what a restored engine did when it was being used the way it was meant to be used. He hoped she was playing music. He hoped it felt like exactly what it was the first night of something that had a long way left to go. He drank his coffee. Cold again. He went to bed. At 5:31 he was already awake. Already dressed. He made fresh coffee this time. Actually drank it while it was hot. Stood at the window and watched Emancipation Avenue come into its morning. The light changing from dark to gray to the particular pale gold of early Houston morning that never looked quite like anywhere else. He drove to the shop. Unlocked the door. Turned on the lights. The Cadillac in the center bay. Hood up. Waiting. He put on his gloves. Got to work. At 6:47 he knew the time because he'd just checked the clock on the wall. He heard a vehicle turn into the lot. He knew the sound before he saw it. The F100. Running the way it ran now, which was differently than it had run before. Smother. More itself. It pulled into the lot and parked in its spot. The door opened. Tanya got out. She was wearing the same jacket she'd been wearing yesterday. She looked like someone who had not slept, or had slept very briefly, in the way of a person who had been doing something more important than sleeping. She came in, set the keys on the workbench. He looked at her. "How was it?" he asked. She stood there for a moment, thinking about how to answer. Not performing the answer, actually thinking. "I drove it to my grandmother's house," she said. "She's in 5th Ward. She came outside when she heard it." A pause. She stood next to it for a long time. Just stood there with her hand on the side of it. Another pause. She said it smelled like her daddy's car. He was quiet. "She cried a little," Tanya said. "Not much. Just a little." He looked at the F100 through the shop window. Then he looked at Tanya. "Good," he said. She nodded. "Go get some sleep," he said. "Monday's early." "What time?" 7. She nodded. Picked up her bag. Walked to the door. She stopped. Turned back. "Mr. Hayes." He waited. "Thank you," she said. "For the truck. For the program." She looked like she had more to say and was deciding whether to say it. Then she said it. "For seeing something worth working with." He looked at her for a moment. "That's what this place is for," he said. She nodded. Went to the door. Out into the morning. He stood in the shop. Alone again. Which was fine. Which was right. The quiet of a space that was full of everything that had happened in it. The work and the learning and the early mornings and the mistakes and the things done right and the things done better on the second try and the voices of 8 people figuring out together what they were capable of. He went to the workbench, picked up the keys to the F100, held them for a moment, put them on the hook by the door. Their specific hook, their specific place. Then he went back to the Cadillac. Got back to work. Outside, the morning was doing what it always did, moving at its own pace, carrying its own weight, making no particular promises and breaking none. The F100 sat in the parking lot in the early light, sky blue. Exactly itself. Waiting the way patient things waited, not urgently, not restlessly, but with the complete and quiet certainty of a thing that knew it was where it was supposed to be, and had nothing to prove about it. On the hood, almost invisible, a small smudge of a handprint where Tanya's grandmother had rested her hand. A woman Delvon had never met, standing next to a truck that smelled like her daddy's car, crying just a little. That was the thing about things made with honest hands. They went places you'd never go. They touched people you'd never meet. They carried something of the person who made them into rooms and mornings and moments that had nothing to do with the maker and everything to do with the made. That was the thing. That was the whole thing. He kept working,